men, different short. Lone Ranger, we have all 120 episodes on this. Audie Murphy, you bet.
Did you have the real Lone Ranger plates more, or did you have the guy that...
Gold. Gold. Yeah, and actually the second one, he showed up in an earlier episode as a cavalry soldier before he was hired as Lone Ranger. Clayton Moore much better. The second one was a bit too wooden. But no, like I said, I was born in 1971, but I was raised in the 50s.
How about Johnny Depp?
Johnny Depp? No. Yeah? Okay, Phelan says yeah.
That was the latest.
No, Carl Smith, what was it, Ernest Tubb? We watched Grand Ole Opry. Pardon? Tennessee Ernest Ford or Tennessee Williams, either one. Oh yeah, that was good music. Well, good morning, everyone. If I'm going to make it through this whole presentation, I need more coffee. Yep, okay, well, whenever you get a chance, if you could top me off. I've narrowed this down to 80 slides, which is about, I think, 78 pictures or so. So I don't know how long we'll do this. I don't know how many weeks this will take. Either it could be this today, it could be today and next week or whatever. At some future date, I'll put together probably several presentations on my trip to Israel, which was 21 years ago. It's hard to believe. But that combines not only the archaeological dig that I participated in, but also traveling to different Holy Land sites. So that, there's a lot more. I think I took 15 rolls of film, something like that. Days before digital cameras. Anyway, African adventure, my trip to Uganda and South Sudan. How many of you know where Uganda and South Sudan are located, apart from on the African continent, which Africa is a continent, not a country? I think in our popular minds, we tend to think of Africa as a country, as basically all the same. It's not. It's like 80-some countries, and very, very, very diverse. Yeah.
However, at one time it was a lot less.
Well, it was a lot fewer. They were colonies, not countries, and many fewer. However, the diversity was still there, but it was, and it still exists now because of various tribes, people groups, might say now, and usually separated by language. And I hate to think how many languages are spoken on the African continent, well over 2,000. And then you add in, various dialects. I mean, it is a large, large area. And like I said, we have to break our minds of this notion that Africa is just one big old country. It's not. And unfortunately, a lot of the national borders, not a lot, most, are artificial borders. In the late 1800s, I think they basically drew out borders on maps with zero regard to the different ethnic groups and languages, and that's led to a lot of conflict because disputes over land and resources and ethnic. Rwanda? You had the Hutus and the Tutsis. Not everyone sounds wrong. Tutu sounds wrong, and Tutsi sounds wrong. Yes, the Tutsis. Tutis. Oh, toothy. Okay. Either way, in English it just doesn't come across right, does it? But the Hutus and the Tutsis, ethnic group, two different ethnic groups, probably two different languages, and there was the horrible fighting that took place in Rwanda where thousands, if not over 1 million, were killed. Liberia has been involved in a civil war lately. Sudan had a 30-year civil war that ended just before my trip. And the country of Sudan was divided in half between North Sudan and South Sudan. North Sudan is primarily Arab and Muslim. South Sudan, primarily trying to think of the best way to say this, but primarily black and Christian, although there are Muslims and ethnic religions. But basically when the Muslim Arabs swept through the African continent, they displaced a lot of the indigenous the indigenous peoples, and so that's why the majority is Arab. I mean, they're African in the sense that they live in Africa and they have for centuries, but ethnically it's brown complexion versus black complexions. And there's that ethnic difference, there's religious difference, and at the border region, there's oil. And so a lot of dispute over that resource. Now the sad thing is, Sudan is one of the, if not the poorest country in the world. Poverty in the United States is nothing compared to Sudan. South Sudan primarily. Yes, Kevin?
I may have missed it. What year was your trip?
My trip was in 2009. Yeah, thank you for asking. Any of you ever hear of an organization called Lutheran Heritage Foundation? Okay, many of you have. Those of you who haven't, it was started many, many years ago, and their mission is to provide Lutheran materials, principally the Small Catechism, and translate it into various languages. And they've done work translating the Catechism and a lot of other materials into probably well over 200 languages now throughout the world. And another part of their work is they started working with the, there was a man named Andrew Elisa, Andrew Mbogo Elisa, who, as I remember the story, was looking for, the true church, true doctrine, and he stumbled across the Small Catechism and Lutheran Heritage Foundation. That was about 15 years, I think, or so prior to my trip. Anyway, he contacted them, and that led to the birth of the Lutheran Church of Sudan. Through his efforts, he was actually on campus at the seminary when I was there, so I got to meet and know him there a little bit. Wasn't really close to him, but and they, through Lutheran Heritage Foundation and Andrew Elisa, they formed a seminary. for the training of pastors from South Sudan, and called the Concordia Lutheran Institute for the Holy Ministry. Lutherans, whether you're German or Sudanese, we like long titles and acronyms. It's a Lutheran thing. I don't know where that came from, but anyway. You can go to the next slide.
Pastor,
Yes.
you never mentioned really where Sudan and Uganda.
I'm getting to that. That was my opening question. Do any of you know where they're at, besides in Africa?
Well, I know Sudan is in North Africa, and then Uganda go on south.
Okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Okay, I'm breaking this presentation up. Yes, Traylon. Why is that? I didn't quite understand you, Traylon. I'm hard of hearing, too much rock and roll. I broke the phone? Okay. Uh-oh. Oh, I'm going to break the presentation up into two major categories. The first on held up in Uganda. And divide that into time in the capital of Kampala, and then a trip that I took, unexpected, unplanned trip throughout Uganda, special delivery. And then the second part, we'll get to teaching in South Sudan at the Concordia Lutheran Institute for the Holy Ministry. Introduce you to the future shepherds of that church, which now current, and then about teaching on the Gospel of John. I was Lutheran Heritage Foundation, in order to provide teachers for the seminary, they recruit pastors here stateside who are willing to go over and do a short teaching stint, usually a month. Some go longer, but a month is usually workable if you're in parish ministry. And actually, I recently got another email. They're looking for professors to go over for a new round of students and classes. At that time, it was hard enough going because I was married. Well, I still am. But this was before kids. Now, it would be a bit too hard, I think. Not only on me, but on the kids. But that sacrifice is nothing compared to the men at the seminary here. So anyway, that's the breakdown of the presentation. Uganda and South Sudan. Next slide. All right, this is, where in the world? Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? That's right. As I mentioned before, on top, I don't know if you can see the dividing line. That's Uganda and South Sudan. Uganda is on the bottom, South Sudan on the top. Right above South Sudan is Sudan. Those two used to be one country until, I think, 2008, 2009, something like that, in which South Sudan won its independence. Unfortunately, and that was after 30 years of civil war. I think when most of us think of Sudan, we think of Darfur. You remember that from the news 15, 20 years ago now, probably 15. And Darfur, as I recall, is above South Sudan on the left-hand side, straight up. So it's not part of South Sudan. But there's a lot of discrimination in northern Africa. The Arabs look down on the black Africans. And, it's an unfortunate part of our fallen human nature that it's not unique to our country and the problems that we've experienced and are experiencing. And there's a long history, and there's a lot of distrust, understandably. Yeah, Deanne.
Going back to the size, could you liken the countries to states? Do you have any idea? I mean, I could research that.
I don't have any idea.
That's okay, I'm
But-
just curious. if you're
But I will say, I should have looked that up, but I will say when I took the flight from Kampala, which is at the bottom of Uganda, there's Lake Victoria, the white blotch. And it's on about halfway along the border of Uganda is Kampala, the capital. From there, to fly to where the seminary was in Yuba, which is let's say, a third of the way up in the bottom left-hand side. I think it was about an 8-hour flight in a biplane type, or a single prop with a smaller plane. So, the maps we have are very deceiving in terms of relative size because of how they're laid out. And so that'd be an interesting thing to know. But anyway, so there's Uganda, where we're going to start out here. And as I say, held up in Uganda. The original plan was the flight from Amsterdam lands in Kampala, and then in the next day or two, I was supposed to fly to the seminary in South Sudan in Yambio. However, things didn't quite work out that way because the plane that flew to Yambio is a single prop plane, and they can only take so much weight. Now, I've lost weight in the last, well, it wasn't quite me. But anyway, they were already at capacity, so I got bumped. Unfortunately, this plane only goes about once every week or so, and it delivers mail as well. So, I'm stuck in Uganda now. I was supposed to teach for pretty much a whole month, and now it's getting chewed down the amount of time that I would actually have to teach. So go ahead, next slide. There you can see Kampala, the red square there, Lake Victoria. Beautiful scene there. And unfortunately, you can't see where Yambio is in South Sudan. But you look here, down in this corner, what country is that? Somebody with good eyes. Rwanda. And I actually got a chance to get fairly close to the Rwandan border. Next to that is Tanzania, or as it's said over there, Tanzania, I think is how it's pronounced there. Kenya, which is pronounced Kenya, or Kenya. Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is anything but democratic. That is probably one of the most dangerous places in the world. Democratic Republic of Congo, because of rebel groups. There's also a rebel group called the Lord's Liberation Army. The Lord's Revolutionary Army, the LRA, that operates in South Sudan. And their goal, as I recall, is to overthrow the government of Uganda. These people are really, really, really nasty pieces of work because they kidnap children. They rape the girls, and then these girls, if they go back home or if they escape, unfortunately they are very much stigmatized when they go home. So it's double injury. The boys are basically become trained to be soldiers. I think they dope them up or whatever. these people do things like skin people alive. Nasty, nasty, nasty people. Apparently they were about 10 miles from the seminary, outside Yambio. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a little, as you can see, I took pictures all over the landscape, just to kind of give you a sense of what Africa looks like. Most of us, I think, when we think of Africa, and here again, the whole continent, what do you usually think of?
The jungle.
The jungle. Yeah, we think of the jungle. Yes, Traylon? A zoo. Except it's not just a zoo. We think of animals that are in a zoo, but we think of them running all over the place, right? For those of us who are a bit older, we think of wild, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Lions, tigers, and bears, oh my.
That looks like Bond's motorbike.
That looks like Bond's motorbike. Those actually, most likely, are taxis. A very common form of transportation is taxi, because most people don't own cars or whatnot, and many of the taxis are motorcycles. They also have cars as taxis. I rode in a taxi car, and actually we got in an accident, ended up in the ditch. Some guy tried to cut across the road. He had like an S10 pickup, and it was loaded about twice as high, higgledy-piggledy with wood or something like that. Anyway, he decided to zip across the highway. Traffic is crazy, by the way, and we ended up T-boning him at 45. He ended up off the side of the road on his side. We ended up in the ditch, and the ditches there are about that deep. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. I was riding in the back seat, and we could see what was going to happen. And anyway, I ended up, fortunately there were airbags, but I was in the back seat, and I ended up doing a shoulder into the passenger side seat. But we all got out. By the time we got out of the car, which wasn't very long, there were probably 30 or more guys trying to get the pickup truck set up upright. Now the axle had broken and whatnot. Anyway, this guy and our taxi driver, they start bickering back and forth, and the truck driver is blaming us for T-boning him. One thing you notice, what I noticed after I got off the airplane, and it was at night, but driving back to where I stayed at the hotel, there are people everywhere. Everywhere. Tons, people after people after people after people. It's truly amazing. But yeah, the motorcycles as taxis, I remember seeing one lady on her way to work. She was dressed up nice, work suit or whatever, and she's perched side saddle on the back of the motorcycle going to work.
Oh, Pastor?
Yeah.
I would like to say shortly after Diane and Tom were married, they went into the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And they had to learn how to get along with less.
Yes, get along with much less.
But they loved it. They said, Diana said that everybody should try it.
We should. We really should. They get by with a lot less. You can see, this is along the roadside. Not all buildings are like this, but there's, unfortunately, a lot of dilapidated buildings, a lot of trash. And that was something hard to get used to. It's very, here again, I think we have in our mind this idea of pristine, rustic nature. No, it's kind of jarring. There's trash everywhere. And I think part of it is they don't really have a public trash system, and so it's just part of, people don't think about it, they get something, they just throw it. Drove me nuts. Is not used to it. But you'd have a mix, there you have a building, there you have a little shack with some kids outside of it, you can barely see them. A lot of variety there. Okay, next slide. And I misspelled fairway. Yeah, Trayvon. Grapes? Yeah, I don't know if they had grapes, but they, mangoes, bananas, you can see other types of, different melons. Basically open air market. Very common. And bananas, I'm telling you, bananas. You see big, sort of like military type trucks, packed to the hill with bananas, and they're all green. And I saw one guy, and a lot of people, if they buy bananas, they'll buy like a big part on the stem to take home. It's a staple food there, and I'm trying to think of the name of the dish. No, not banana bread. Yeah, it's, it starts with an M. It's like mataki or something like that. Anyway, basically, it's either by boiling or roasting in ashes, basically cooking in some way, these green bananas, and then mash them like mashed potatoes. Taste like chalk. Terrible. Oh, matuke, that's it, matuke. Tastes terrible, very high in potassium though. However, it picks up other flavors well. So if there's a broth poured on it, it tastes wonderful. But just by itself, it's green bananas, basically.
Pastor, were they bananas or plantains?
I believe they're actually bananas, not plantains. Yeah, good question though. Because there is a difference. I remember seeing a lot of people ride bicycles. And here again, bicycles are not only for riding, but for also transport. I saw one guy with a full, I don't know if you've ever seen a full stem of bananas, but it's about this big clump. Taking it home on a bicycle. Resting on the seat, he's walking. I saw another guy, and I think they were probably 10 foot long, steel, bars of steel, about 10 foot long, stacked about that high, resting on a bicycle seat. He's going, I'm like, how in the world did he ever get home? But a lot of fresh fruit, and especially bananas. Now I will say the fruit, I had a pineapple once at the hotel. I have never in my life tasted a sweeter, more delicious pineapple. And did you know that the core is edible? We don't eat the core because it's hard as a rock, isn't it? This was just as soft as the rest. Oh, it was just very good. And you can see, unfortunately, trash. It's very disheartening. Next slide. Breakfast is served. This was breakfast at the hotel that I stayed at. That is a Spanish omelet, believe it or not. Well, whites and greens. But that's not a green. That chicken had a hard life. Let's just put it that way. I think I had some fried chicken as I was leaving at the airport restaurant. There again, that chicken had a hard life. There wasn't a lot of meat on the bones. Here, probably because of whatever nutritional whatever the bird ate, the yolks are greenish. Now here again, for me, not terribly appetizing. I choked it down, and after that it was toast and jam, and then tea. People drink a lot of tea. And they also have what's called African tea, which basically they mix, I think it's a spiced milk in with. I didn't care for it, but drink a lot of tea. And I wanted something that had been boiled. If any of you have ever traveled overseas, even in Israel this happened, which Israel is very modern and all that, you're going to pick up some sort of stomach bug that's going to make you sicker than a Dickens. So you want the water boiled with an inch of its life. Okay, next slide. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know what my big, yeah, Trayvon.
Yes.
It's not a bathtub. Well, it depends, I guess. No, a bathroom, yeah, a toilet. You know what my biggest fear was going over to Uganda and specifically South Sudan? Well, not a snake coming up. My biggest concern wasn't the Lord's Revolutionary Army. It wasn't every disease known to man. I had to get inoculations when you travel abroad. And depending on the region is how many shots you get. I needed to get a shot for everything. I think I took 6 shots all at once, 3 in each arm. Imagine when you go to like India, Thailand, you've got to, for traveling. I was so thankful for a Western toilet at the hotel, because otherwise it's a squatty. I mean, in a hotel, it's a ceramic hole in the ground. Out in other places, it's just a hole in the ground. Forgive me for getting into this detail, but the whole concept of sitting down rather than squatting, I think it's an English thing. Because in France, as I've been told, they've got squatties there too. In Japan, yeah. They also have the whole bidet thing, which is just kind of... Anyway, I was so thankful. And fortunately, they did have a Western toilet at the seminary. Yeah, it wasn't hooked up to water, so you had to pour water in the tank to flush it. And it wasn't hooked up to outdoor plumbing, and so it just emptied out the back of the outhouse. And it was hotter than the blazes because it was covered in tin, and it was kind of tightly constricted. But I didn't mind. I was very thankful, and you had to get a key because it was just for the visiting professors. Because we're the only ones who wanted it. Anyway, next slide. Okay. Like I said, I got held up in Uganda. I spent close to a week or so at the hotel, and I was actually hung up in Uganda almost 2 full weeks, or maybe 2 full weeks. I got connected with our local missionary in Kampala, and they were getting ready to do a trip distributing small catechisms that had been translated into the Riankore language, which is one of the dialects, or one of the languages, and like I said, in that area there are several languages just in Uganda and various dialects. Well, this was a fairly prominent one, and so the catechism had been translated into the local language. They had them, they were printed and ready to deliver to, I think, either 10 or 12 different congregations spread throughout western Uganda, which there took me close to the Rwandan border. And so I got to tag along. with our missionary, 2 other LCMS, one another pastor, I think, and another just a young layman who was very adventurous. And then I think it was 4 or 5 of the pastors of the Lutheran Church of Uganda, which is the sister church of our Missouri Synod. But I got to go along on this trip because I had nothing else to do except twiddle my thumbs at the hotel. And it was expensive, more expensive than I realized. And I was running out of money. I had to wire for more money, because all my money was out. Part of our trip started out, and I have a couple of pictures here. This is a technical workshop, a school, where there are a lot of orphans in various African countries. A lot of orphans. Consequence of warfare and disease, primarily. And probably famine, occasional famine as well. And this school was to teach technical skills, life skills, so they could earn a living once they got older. And in one of the classes, we were all gathered in one of the classrooms, and all the students there, and they were able to basically give a sermon. One of the local pastors gave a sermon there. Anyway, this is a technical workshop. They're teaching plumbing and VCP something, but various trades, like bricklaying, that kind of stuff, woodworking.
Boys and girls in the school, or just guys?
Well, both. The boys, vocational trades. Bricklaying, plumbing, probably electrical, maybe, things like that. The girls, secretarial and sewing, primarily. So, next slide. Yeah, that's the chalkboard. Yeah, it's plumbing. And you can also see a bunch of bricks there. And I can't remember what all else. Now, when I got to the seminary in Sudan, my chalkboard was very similar. It was on an easel, and it was about this big, about that wide, and the chalk was about like that long. And they did have some more pieces, but I stuck with the smaller. They did have some a student would bring the chalk, but they had very little, so I didn't want to waste at all. But you can go to the next slide. And here you can see that, they're practicing laying brick in the class. Which, frankly, we need more vocational schools. We really do. A lot of kids graduate high school totally unprepared for life. Next slide. Driver's ed. Oh, I'm not kidding. This is driver's ed. You can see, Light College Driving School is what it says on the top of the car. So they did offer driver's ed there. Now, something tells me either the lessons were very long or very short. And Kevin and Beth, maybe it was like this in Thailand, maybe, I don't know. But what would you describe traffic like in, these other countries?
Well, everyone in here knows me pretty well, and I know my reputation says I'm prone to exaggeration, which of course is not true. But I would just say it's like nothing, it's like traffic laws are more suggestions than laws. I think of our time in Damascus when we were visiting Megan at the time when we could do something wonderful like that. And you could see that in the line of, as this highway was being developed, there was room for 4 lanes of traffic. And at one point I counted over, and including the people who were driving like on the side of the road and on the grassy parts and whatever, there were 11 different lines like this.
Yeah.
And that was my first introduction to it. Although in China, we saw people driving and there was an accident, a biker got hit, and the driver stopped and threw the bike and the biker into the back of his car and took off. And Kevin and I were just shocked. And the person who was driving our car said that, well, if they didn't move them out of the way, they would be flattened.
Yeah.
Because there were just so many. It's otherworldly. It's like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. It is chaotic. Traffic laws, as far as I can tell, like you said, they're suggestions, but
No one's buying.
it's every man for themselves. It is, and yet, apart from, you know, the occasional, it either goes or it's a dead stop. It's like water. It's like the flowing of water when it's moving. And it's just a mass of people, and everybody, like water or electricity, you take the path of least resistance. If there is an opening that may or may not be able to accommodate you, you take it as fast as you can. Now, on the highways, it's a mix of motorcycles, cars, transport trucks, buses, taxi buses, not like full-length school buses, but like an extended van. And you're amazed how many people you can fit in one of those. But it just, and people zipping and that, and even if the traffic has stopped, you got these taxi drivers trying to wind their way through, and then when you get in town, in the city, add to that mix on the streets, bicyclists and people. And really, really big potholes. I mean, huge. Yeah, Gene.
And there wasn't any horns honking.
I don't remember a lot of horns honking, but it's just mad chaotic. And because of their colonial past, roundabouts.
Oh, yeah.
They got roundabouts. And traffic, guys directing traffic, which, I don't know what's the point, but maybe it's shifting directions or something like that. But, and I remember I was on one of these taxi buses with like 18 people on. And I'm sitting like this, and these people were all going to work, and the traffic got stuck. And our van happened to be, the front tire was in a pothole about this big, like that. And so waiting for the traffic to go, and he's going zoom, zoom, kind of rocking back and forth. So once it goes, he can go. And here comes this, moving in between the parked cars, comes a woman with something on her head, a child in her arms, and two children behind her, walking between us in a space about that big, between the back seat of the car in front of us and our driver going, vroom, vroom. And I'm freaking out because I'm thinking this poor woman and her children could get crushed. But it's a flow. It's really interesting to see. I would hate to drive it. Now, the one time the traffic was clear on the highway was when I think it was someone with the government, either the Ugandan government or the UN, and stationed along the highway. I think, Beth, I see you shaking your head.
I was going to say politician right away.
Some politician, and about every maybe quarter mile, you had somebody in uniform with a flag. And going like this, maybe half a mile or a mile in front of the car. And everybody knew, get off to the side of the road. And so this one like this, whoa, whoa. And here comes this limo just speeding down an open highway. Rank has its privileges, exactly. And then after the mucky muck goes, then it goes all back to chaos. But it works, strangely enough. Crazy. But yeah, driver's ed. Next slide. And here's typing class for the girls.
Is that in Uganda?
This is Uganda, yeah. This is in Uganda. This is in the capital city of Kampala.
Manual typewriters, looks like, I can see.
Manual typewriters, yeah, of various sorts. I think this is where a lot of our junk has ended up. Basically, you know, what we are done with goes. Next slide. Computer lab.
We have one of those in our attic.
And you can see that's either the chairs or I don't know if you can see the bench. There's a bench and a top. Very common. That's what the chairs were like, or the stools or benches were like at the seminary. All solid mahogany. Very rough cut and cobbled together. But imagine sitting on that for class for a couple hours. Next. Okay, this was part of our trip. We stopped at an orphanage. And of course, I think this was a girls' orphanage. And you can see all the girls wearing uniforms. There again, there are a lot of orphanages. A lot of children without parents, or in some cases, parents that, for whatever reason, unable to raise their children or unwilling to, or whatever, they end up in an orphanage. And so part of the church's work was assisting these orphanages. Next. Okay, I'm going to we'll kind of get our feet wet here. And I couldn't remember the locations. I was hoping to find, because at some time the missionary had posted on the internet, they had a GPS device, and so they were able to track all the places we went. It was 10 or 12 churches, as I recall, that we visited, distributing small catechisms. I kind of picked and choose from my pictures to show you the variety of church buildings in different locations. So there's no particular order and whatnot. But this is constructed out of the sticks. I'm not sure if those are from a banana tree or not, but mud. And then banana leaves, that kind of. And unfortunately, they have termites that every now and then you have to replace the mud, because the termites will eat into it to build their own, huge termite mounds, but that's church. Compare that. Pardon?
Is that one long building or is it three small ones?
Looks like one long building. But compare that to our sanctuary. And yet both are the Lord's house. Both are sanctified by the word of God and prayer, God's presence, the proclamation of his word and sacraments. Yes, Nancy?
Do you have one pastor that visits all these 10 churches?
As I recall, different churches had different situations. There were circuit pastors that would go from church to church to church. So they may not have it, just like here back in the 1800s, late 1800s. You had the circuit rider. Same type of thing. And we actually had the Lutheran Church in Uganda, the bishop, the head honcho, going with us, and you'll see that at different congregations, not all, but at different ones, they would give their parish report to the bishop.
Is this one still in Uganda or?
This is all still Uganda. Yeah, we won't get to South Sudan definitely until either next week or the week after.
Pastor, when you were there, did you notice, do they do training of like lay people?
Yes, and that's actually what our missionary was there for through Lutheran Hour Ministries, as I recall. That at his location in Kampala, they were doing sort of lay teacher type training, and so yeah. So yeah, you can see very rudimentary structure. Next slide. Here's another similar. Different roof. They didn't have the corrugated metal roof, but grass of some sort. Congregation there gathered. We were treated, as Paul said when he landed on the one island after the shipwreck. We were treated with unusual kindness. We were treated like kings. Very, very humbling from these people that have basically nothing. Because we were Westerners, they bought pop for us because they knew Westerners like to drink pop. Now, for a Westerner, pop was, I think, like 2,000 shekels, or 2,000 shillings, which translated about 25 cents. The local price was a lot less. There's the price for the locals, and then there's the price for how that works. But still, these people in their incredible poverty made sure that like I said, they treated us like royalty. And when they brought that soda pop out, and these were in like 7-Up bottles from the 70s. It was extremely, extremely humbling. Next slide. And there's the altar. Next one. Room in the pew for you. There's social distancing for you. Right? All of these people crammed in to this tiny little space, overflowing with people, with Christians. Yeah.
I would like to say, Diane and Tom, when they were in the Peace Corps, they were stationed on the island of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Yeah.
It was nearby, in the Eastern Caribbean.
Yeah. Yeah.
They loved it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, it's very humbling. You can just see these people were, cram-packed into this little structure. And, we had, forgive me for saying this, even before social distancing, we've had plenty of excess capacity.
Do the men attend church, or is it always just women and children?
Yeah, men do too. Yeah, and it may just be, because of the light and the camera, I don't know. But yeah, men, women, and children all worship together. Next slide. There again, you can see he's getting up to give the parish report, I think. Notice all the children. Now, the other thing is, this is near the equator. It's hot and humid as the blazes. Okay. Next. Okay, she's getting up. She's reading the parish report there. Because the bishop is there as well. And I think I have the next picture. Okay, this is a little hard to see. Let me come back and look on my screen. Well, that doesn't help. But it's giving, it's listing the date and the readings for that Sunday. And any, just like our church records, any baptisms, funerals, all that kind of stuff. I don't think this is the page, but there's another page, possibly a different congregation, where it lists the membership and a record of their offerings. Now, at the time, 2,000 Ugandan shillings was about a quarter. Their weekly offerings were probably about 10 shekels, or 10 shillings, I keep saying shekels, 10 shillings. This person gave 1 shilling. This person gave 2 shillings. Like I said, we're talking extreme poverty. And for these churches to have pastors, they had to be supported by the central church. However, just for the principle of, they did a certain portion would go to the main church, even though it didn't cover a whole lot, but just the principle of not being totally dependent upon the central church body to make that contribution. But they're again seeing that and them treating us like kings with soda pop, and then having a meal with meat, which odds are they don't eat meat a lot. Now, I'm choosing to believe that we had beef ribs. But it was a very small cow. I have a sneaking suspicion it was goat. I don't know. I don't want to know. Anyway, next slide. Here again, this is another church. So we had the mud constructed building. We had sort of the Gilligan's Island kind of look. This is a tree with a tarp, but it's the Lord's house. Sanctified by the Word of God and prayer, baptism, the Lord's Supper. I don't think this is, well, you see some older people in the back. I can't remember if this is the picture of Sunday school or not. A little bit different, isn't it? Next slide. They don't have organs, but they do have drums. And so these ladies are leading the worship, basically keeping a beat. Or, maybe doing a little bit more, but, they're the band, the choir, what have you. Make a joyful notice to the Lord. Special delivery. There you can probably see the banana leaves sticking out of the walls, part of the walls. Those are the small catechisms in the language. You see the pews, they have pews.
Do they conduct the church services in the specific dialect of the area, or is there any English?
As far as I know, in the dialect of the area. Now, I'm not sure about in the out in the countryside, but in Kampala and like at the seminary in South Sudan, everybody speaks English. They speak their native, whatever their native language is, but everybody who goes to school learns English. And they speak better English than we do. Grammatically. Queen's English, except no B's and thous. But they speak grammatically better English than we do. However, it's very literal. The nuances that come from being a native speaker of a language, so I had to be very careful in teaching that I didn't slip into using basically slang or colloquialisms. I learned early on you had to be very precise in what you said.
I'm just going to say that when we were in Italy and we were traveling the trains and we were trying to figure out if we were going in the right direction, there was just about 3 times there were African people that told us we were right, and they spoke very good English.
Perfect English.
Yeah, and they were actually working in Italy, and this one guy told us that his wife was a doctor, and it was like more on the coast of Africa, one of those countries.
Yeah.
Exactly. He went home then every 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And that was just the way they had set up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, anyone who goes to school, they learn English. And so that wasn't, I taught in English, they all spoke to me in English. I tried to encourage them. At the last assignment they had was to give a sermon to the class on section of the Gospel of John. And I told them, figuring, well, it'll be easier for them. And you're going to be doing it when you're preaching anyway. It's okay, preach in your native language, rather than trying to do something in English. Well, the first student, it was a source of pride for him to be able to preach in English, rather than his. And so, like ducks, everybody else followed suit. Oh well. You can see the altar flowers. There's one of those, kind of not LED lamps, the fiber optic lamps. Yeah. Next slide. Going back to the other church, I don't know why I had the second picture there, but anyway, next. Thanksgiving. They were so thankful for these catechisms. I don't think I have this picture, but there was one woman, probably, you'd say almost middle-aged, but I remember her looking at the book and going like, it's like she got it. Now I understand. It was a very touching moment. But celebrating us being there and receiving the books. Next slide. Again, celebration. A lot of children. They got children coming out their ears. I mean, we have former children coming out our ears. Quite a different, I'm not going to say a different problem, a different challenge. Okay. And adorable kids. Just adorable. Next. Okay, here, they got their catechisms, taking a look at, and I'm using my favorite collect, the collect of the word, so read, and you can go next slide. Mark, learn. There's Sunday school, I think. No, that's adults and children, but we've given them out, and the pastor wanted them to, the missionary pastor, wanted them to hold the catechism and, a blessing on their study of the catechism.
Now, when they hand out these catechisms, they are assuming that the people can read their own language.
Yeah.
So what's the literacy rate over there?
I honestly don't know, but you're right. If you're some languages haven't been written down, don't have an alphabet, they're just spoken. Others, they have a written. This one, I think probably because it was spoken in many in Kampala, that it was the language of choice to translate into a vocal language. And then, it's not quite the same, but we have like the southern dialect. For the most part, you can understand someone who comes from the south, right? The East Coast, there's variations, a little bit more than that, but, so that's why, and, you know, for these churches, I'm sure they knew in advance, it was a language that the people here could read. You know, they could read their own language.
Did they get to keep them?
Yes, one per household. Yep, these are free distribution. And you can imagine how many books do you think an average family has? Either none or one or two. Maybe a Bible. Or a Bible that's shared, or maybe the pastor is the only one who has a Bible. So very much treasured possession. Yeah, Barb.
Just a comment, our vacation Bible school this June, our mission project is to send money to the Lutheran organization that gives out catechisms and things like that in areas like Uganda.
Yeah.
And things like that. In other words, we're not actually buying the books, we're going to supply the money to get books, catechisms, and Bibles into the hands of people in their native language.
Yeah.
And that will be our mission project, Vacation Bible School.
And places like the African continent, Southeast Asia, South America, they're the future of the church. Church in these countries are bursting at the seams. Not so much here. My take on it, by and large, is, and this has happened throughout time, God has said to our broader culture, you had my word for 200 years, and you, by and large, have despised it. It's not necessarily the fault of congregations who have remained faithful that they end up closing. In many respects, it's God saying, you know, you faithfully proclaim my word here, and people haven't cared. I'll go where my word will be heard. We face a different challenge. In these countries, churches are they have, like in Kenya, I think, new church opening like every week. Just phenomenal growth. Europe, same thing is happening with mosques. Because of all the influx, primarily. Not conversions. But anyway, read, mark, learn, go ahead. Inwardly digest. Everybody in their Sunday's best. Isn't that nice? Okay, next. Okay, here's Sunday school. Pretty amazing. Truly amazing. Sadly, many of those children won't live to adulthood. War, disease, famine. Malaria is a big problem. Huge problem. Okay. And you get, the other thing is, you get in, here we're close to the equator. So it's, I mean, what is it, Jane Goodall with the apes. That's Uganda. This is a very tropical region. We're really close to the equator. And same is true pretty much of South Sudan. You get to North Sudan, then it's a desert. Okay, next. Yeah, a small catechism in every home. Okay, Next. So yeah, men and women. Next. Okay, this isn't quite this isn't the one yet, but this is outside another church. You can see a very, very basic, humble structure.
Is the guy on the right a pastor too? I see.
No, he was the young guy. He wasn't a pastor and wasn't either yet or a seminary student, but anyway, he was in Uganda. Very adventurous young guy. A lot braver than I would have been, but anyway, he was there pretty much on his own. Okay, next. Oh yeah, the middle of nowhere. This is getting close to the border with Rwanda. And this is literally, it's like the Far Side cartoon with the billboard side. She's got a map of nowhere and it says, now you are entering the middle. This was fun to get to in the Jeep that we had, 4-wheel drive, because, big ruts and, the road was not quite really a road. But, next slide. There again, really out in the middle of nowhere. Banana trees are all over the place. That also doubled in one place as the privy. Like I said, my biggest fear. Next slide. And here, out in the middle of nowhere, another church, but it's a brick church. Yeah, kind of fancy, and actually on the other hill, I think there was a Roman Catholic church as well, but unexpected that you would have this brick structure, but sponsored by a stateside congregation. So you have the very humble to not quite so humble, still humble by our standards. I think we would look at that. But here again, out in the middle of nowhere. How in the world they got stuff there to build, I don't know. Next. Okay, this is the picture I like. What is surprising or what stands out to you in this picture? Kane.
The gray-haired man.
The gray-haired man, you are right. To the best of my recollection, that is the only gray-haired man or woman I saw in all of Uganda.
Meaning people don't live very long?
Meaning people don't live very long.
I was going to say, I wonder what the
Average lifespan at the time, as I recall in South Sudan, for a man was 47. For a woman, likely less because child more, death in birth, giving birth. So probably lower. But yeah, that's the only man I saw in the whole time I was there that had gray hair. And yet you see all the kids. Okay, well, Kate, you had the answer because I put it up there. Very observant. Very observant. Okay, I only have a few more Uganda pictures, so we're going to go ahead and finish up. Next slide. Oh, yes. And there I am. That's our tour group standing on the equator.
Now, were all four of you going to the seminary to teach?
No, the bald one. Well, the first one on this side, I think he was already a pastor, and for a while he eventually served as a regional mission head, I think, for that part of the world, and now I think he's back in a parish stateside. The next one, he was the missionary, LCMS missionary that was in Kampala. And he subsequently returned stateside, and then I think he took a job working for a non-LCMS mission agency of some sort. So I don't know if he's back in the parish or not. Then you have the young guy that was sort of there, I'm not sure exactly why. But, and then you have Bill Oldby, and then I think right next to me, I think that's the bishop. And then next to him, I think was a guy actually from South Africa who was taking some lay training through Lutheran Hour Ministries in Kampala. And then I think the other guy in the northern hemisphere was one of the pastors in Lutheran Church in Uganda. But that's sort of a highlight of my life. There was one of these on each side of the highway. And they did have, you could pay like 2,000 shillings or whatever, and pour water and see it go down opposite directions. I didn't do that. But that's sort of a highlight of my life. I've been to the southern hemisphere. Look! Next slide. Oh, this is the feast at one of the congregations that they prepared for us. Like I said, they treated us like kings. Now, I'm ashamed to say, because of what we're accustomed to eating, there were some things, well, some for health reasons, you were kind of like, I don't know if I want to eat that salad that's been out in 90-degree humidity for who knows how long that has boiled eggs in it. I think I'll pass on that. The meat, like I said, the ribs were pretty small, and it was kind of gristly, and here again, our Western sensibilities, we kind of, but they were giving us the best of the best that they had. And you want to talk about feeling humbled and ashamed of myself. Right here. Next page. Next slide. And there it is on wrap. You have the bananas, you have melons, various melons. I think it was tea that everyone had to drink. Quite a spread, really, quite a spread.
Lutherans throughout the world
Potluck.
love potlucks.
Yeah, yeah. And they insisted that we go first. Here again, you want to talk about, humbly. They treated us with unusual kindness. Next. Oh, this was at a restaurant at the hotel. I was back at the hotel, and my local contact guy, I wanted to treat him to supper. I did not get the fish and chips. I forget what I had, but this was out of Lake Victoria. And you see how personally, if I'm having fish, take off the head, the skin, the scales, the fins, all that. But I like how they garnished it with, I think it's a carrot in its mouth. Yum. Yes, Kane.
When I was in Israel, I ordered a fish dinner.
Yeah.
And they came out with the fish with the head on it.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, and I asked the waiter, I said, I know it isn't right, but please go in the kitchen and have them chop the head off. Eat it with the head on.
I generally don't like my food looking at me.
And after the head was off, the fish was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Kevin.
Ironically, that was,
That fish island looked so big, like you're going to take part of my body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was just going to say, ironically, that was probably one of the meals you could have eaten without any hesitation, because the fish was fully fried, and those are British fries.
Yeah, they are.
Chips, as they call
Probably would have been very safe to eat, but.
I think it looks great.
Oh, yeah. Well, it looked even better without the head.
Yeah.
and the tail, and the
You
fins.
don't have to eat the head.
No, but like Faith said, it's looking at you. I mean, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Now, what's really bad is if it winks. It's fresh.
That's sushi.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay, now I'm heading to Uganda, finally get my flight, and I had a picture, took some shots as we were flying over. So there's a shot of beautiful Lake Victoria. And next slide. Lake Victoria is the headwater for the Nile. And there's I think it's the Blue Nile and the White Nile. I forget which one this is. But they go through southern Sudan, flowing all the way up to Egypt, eventually into the Mediterranean. Next. We had a layover. I think this was close to the border. I can't remember if it was in Uganda or South Sudan. But, and unfortunately I didn't get a picture of this, but you can see sort of what the plane kind of looks like. There's this little building and you could get a Coke, and it was cold. It was wonderful. You could also go to the bathroom, which was much appreciated after a 4-hour flight. The neat thing, and I didn't get a picture of this, is they had to refuel the plane. That's partly why we stopped. Out comes this little, looks like an S10 pickup with 2 50-gallon drums and a hand pump. That's the refueling truck for the plane. It took a while. We were laid over for a while. Dirt runway, all of that. Next, there we're getting into, flying over Sudan, southern Sudan. You can see very tropical, a lot of trees, very green, very lush and green. I don't know in terms of, that stuff grows, but in terms of agriculture, how good the soil is, I'm not really sure. You look at the dirt and it's not like, rich Midwestern black dirt, it's all brown. So I'm not sure as far as that goes. But next, Eagle has landed. That was at the airport in South Sudan. And got met and picked up there by the head of the seminary and that. And there were probably 15 guys sitting there on motorcycles as taxis, ready to take whoever came, trying to compete to get their wages for the day. It reminds me of the parable where the master goes out and he hires so many laborers first part of the day, and then he goes out again and go out again. For a lot of people, of course, taxi drivers, it's still somewhat that way here. You pick up fares, but the idea of sitting around waiting for someone to hire you. And I think next slide, maybe. Okay, so we'll stop there and pick up with the second part. So I think we'll probably finish this next week. We got through quite a few slides this morning. And I don't think I have quite as many slides for South Sudan, but spend time on questions and whatnot. You are welcome.